I'm curious, and that's why I'm reading this book, obviously. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews, Proust Edition. This is Book 2, Part 3, so about page 240 to 360 in my version. So in this section, Marcel focuses a lot of time on people in group settings and how they act. He talks for a while about ladies at a party, and he goes on and on about Odette's clothing, which was very boring. He has one more Gilbert heart flip. He realizes that he messed up his chances big time by playing this, hard to get act. So he sells his family heirloom, this vase, to have money to buy Gilbert flowers like every day. But then he sees her walking around town with another guy. After this, he finally gets over her after much more bemoaning, but then at least hopefully this is done. Then that's the kind of the end of that section. So we move on to the second section in the book. At this point, he's going to Baalbek for his health. His doctor tells him to settle his nerves before the train ride by having a shot of alcohol. Instead of a shot, he gets proper wasted, as one does. I got drunk on a train once. My husband and I were staying with my dad. He lives in Germany. And we spent an evening with my cousin in Hamburg. So we went to about 4 or 5, 6, I don't know, some number of bars. We went bar hopping, and then we were completely blitzed on the train. My husband was convinced that we were going the wrong direction, even though the train only goes from Hamburg to other places, so there was no way we went the wrong direction. That was a fun evening. So much like Marcel, getting drunk on trains is a fun time. Marcel sits in his train seat contemplating what being drunk feels like. He talks about seeing colors, that are far brighter hues. He goes on and on for a while about this. I mean, though, man, like, if being drunk does this to him, like, what would happen if he were to take mushrooms? Like, what would happen to him? Maybe he does absinthe later in the book. I should create like a Proust bingo card, like mope over girls, describe boring clothing, obsess over furniture, drink absinthe. I don't know, what else is he gonna get up to? So then Marcel sees this rural village girl come out serving coffee to the guests at the train stop. This concept is so turn of the century. I can't take it. I love it. Anyway, he idolizes her pastoral life without consideration to how privileged he is and how hard her life probably actually is. What is her life that she has to cart coffee and milk out to rich people on the train every day? Like Marcel, he's like, oh, it's beautiful to live in the country, blah, blah, blah. Marcel, though he can imagine, the inner lives of people in his class, he can't give this girl a backstory, probably because he can't imagine it. Instead, he romanticizes rural life instead. I think that hard work would do this boy some good, but I don't think he's fully comprehending what it's like to be a poor rural person, the turn of the century France. It's probably not what he's, it's not wandering around in fields and admiring the nature. It's definitely nothing like that, especially if you're a girl. Anyway, he gets to Baalbek and he's disappointed in the town. The hotel freaks him out for some reason. He can't sleep in the room because it's a new place. That's happened to many of us. And this scene reminds me, though, a little bit of the Goodnight Kiss book from Swan's Way. I think he probably can't sleep because he misses his mom. He talks about it earlier when, she's staying behind and he's all, sad about that. So it makes sense to me that he would also miss her in this way. So we get a long contemplation at the end about the other hotel guests and how they all put on airs with one another and how Marcel, doesn't realize that most of them are probably just pretending to be richer than they are. Kind of like everybody when they go on vacation, especially when they're like all inclusive. They're like, oh yeah, I'm rich. It's like, yeah, right, whatever. So some moments of interest in this book. During the ladies' get-together, one of them talks about how a friend of mine has had the telephone installed in her house. She can order things from tradesmen without having to go out. Of course, the reason technology was invented, war, or to avoid going outside. How very 2020 of you, random lady. There's another part. For the hobby of writing was beginning to become common among women who like to do something, not to be quite useless. So I'm not sure if he's saying here that women write as a hobby and men as a career, or whether he's encouraging of women who care to write instead of like embroider or whatever else ladies who didn't have to work did back then. I'm not knocking on embroidery. I actually do embroidery. I love it. But there are other things you can do. Anyway, what I really hope he isn't saying is that women's writing is a hobbyist thing, in that it's not as artful as men's writing, because, oh, I would go back in time and I would, anyway. He talks about going to the Arc de Triomphe, which was kind of cool. He mentions how when he was there, there were not a ton of people around. I mean, when I went there, it was packed, and it was at the middle of the night. Was I drunk again? Maybe. It seems to be what I do when I go to Europe. He talks about railway stations being transitory places, marvelous places, he says, which I would equate actually to kind of gas stations today. I love gas stations on long journeys. I've done a couple road trips to the States. So I live near Toronto, and I drove on my honeymoon. I drove all the way down to Florida and back up. Like, we did kind of like an Eastern loop. And then a few years ago, we drove to Arizona and back as well. So that was the 36-hour drive, and the other one was, I think, 25 or something like that. Anyway, I love gas stations on long journeys. It sounds weird. I don't know why. I love the crappy coffee. I love there's always weirdos hanging around. I love how you can always expect the same thing, whether it's 11 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. Or 2 in the morning even. There's something comforting, I think, like almost otherworldly about them in their forgettability. Like, gas stations, kind of like railway stations, at least for Marcel, are kind of liminal spaces. They're crossover places that are never quite destinations. They're a space where you've left something behind, but you're not fully in something else. Like, they're a waypoint. And I think that was what's really interesting about when he talks about these marvelous railway stations, is that they're the comparable to, there's still railway stations today, but in terms of how people usually get around, like, we drive around way more, obviously. And so gas stations have taken over this kind of transitory space that, you don't really have memories of gas stations unless something really crazy happened at one of them. I've got a few of those memories, but really gas stations are almost like a safe space on traveling, because you know what you're going to get. And I think that's kind of an interesting concept in society, that we have these places. Or maybe it's just a bunch of bullshit. I don't know. Anyway, there are some quotes that I liked from the book. He said, "For regret, like desires, seeks not to analyze, but to gratify itself." And that makes sense. And then he says, "That is why the better part of our memories exist outside us, in the bladder of rain, in the smell of an unaired room, or the first fresh crackling brushwood fire in a cold grate. Wherever, in short, we happen upon what our mind, having no use for it, has rejected, the last treasure that the last past has in store, the richest, that which, when all our flow of tears seems to have dried at the source, can make us weep again." He's just talking about how, memories are sparked by small things like that, but I think it's kind of a beautiful statement. "I felt upon seeing her that desire to live, which is reborn in us whenever we become conscious anew of beauty and of happiness." For me, it's not so much looking at people. Maybe my kids when they're cute, like when they're sleeping. But for me, that kind of thing is more like nature. Like, there's this place near where I live that I like to walk my dog, and it's always very secluded there, and it's very peaceful. And that one, it always makes me feel kind of nice to walk there. It's kind of like my happy place. And then there's one more. "But by engulfing them thus in a system of habits, which they knew by heart, it sufficed to protect them from the mystery of the life that was going on all around them." So yeah, that was it for this week. Actually, this is quite long. It's longer than I expected. I guess I talked too much about gas stations. But anyway, onwards to the next part. Thank you.